Are you ready for the Word?
Yes, sir.
Turn to Galatians 4. This next portion of Galatians says nothing about the law, nothing about how to be saved, nothing about bondage. This is all about Paul's relationship to the Galatians. We're not going to skip over it to get to the parts that people are more interested in. We're going to go verse by verse, and that's what we've been doing. We're going to continue doing it. So we're going to look at these verses with the same diligence that we've devoted to the others. They're written there for a reason.
Yes, sir.
If they weren't important, they wouldn't be there. Before we read them, though, let me ask you to contemplate your view of our relationship. We're going to talk about Paul's relationship to the Galatians, your view of our relationship. Every relationship has challenges. You know that? The challenges can either overcome you and rob you of the benefits associated with that relationship, or they can strengthen you and enhance the benefits of that relationship. Every relationship has different facets to them. Take a marriage, for example. One facet of the marriage should have started out at least as friendship. Should end up that way too. Another is, the husband and the wife facet. There's the child. You still are a child to your parents, or then when you get married, you end up with in-laws. So there's that whole realm to deal with in a marriage. There's the dad, mom. You're not just a husband now. You become a parent, and so you have children to deal with. There could be employer, employee. One or the other of the marriage could be the CEO of a company that the other one works for. So there's all kind of facets associated with relationships. The same is true when it relates to ministry. It's not just a facet of pastor and congregant. Another facet could be corrector, encourager, instructor, and the corrected, the encouraged, and the taught. There could be the facet of the friendship. That is a different section of the relationship. For instance, Bill and I have been friends since elementary school. That's a long, long time. Long time. Yeah. Also think about it in this way, that Marie has to relate to me as wife and as her pastor. My children, I'm their dad and their pastor. So there's all kind of facets involved in a relationship. This morning we're going to examine Paul's words about his relationship to the Galatians, and we're going to let those words give us a better understanding of Paul. I think it will shed a lot of light on Paul, and hopefully it'll enhance and help our relationship as well. This past week, Thursday actually, I think it was, I had a woman tell me, via social media of course, 98% of your message is condemning, name-calling, and telling people how wrong they are, when you have absolutely zero idea of the situations they're coming from. Is that how you view it? I certainly hope not. And I doubt you'd be here still if that was the case. She said 98% is condemning, name-calling, and telling people how wrong they are. This is one of the issues you have as a teacher and a communicator. When I heard her words or read her words, what I thought is that as a teacher or as a communicator, there are problems that arise. I can control what I say, but I can't control what people hear.
Yes.
And that can be a very frustrating experience. Another frustrating experience can be not being able to control what people hear from others.
Right.
And I think that's what Paul was having to fight against and deal with in Galatia, and it was frustrating him. He was having an issue with making sure that they heard what he said, but he was also frustrated with the fact that while he's gone, others are coming behind him telling things that are the direct opposite of what he was telling them. And he can't control that. He can only hope that he's grown them up enough that they can discern right from wrong and truth from a lie. Paul established an assembly of YAHWEH in the regions of Galatia. Others are coming in, trying to steal the hearts of these people from truth and from Paul. So I want you to pay attention as we read these next 10 verses to the descriptive words that Paul uses. I believe that these words are used to describe the pain that he oftentimes has to suffer. Listen to these words. Verse 11. I am afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain. So the first word he mentions is fear. And this word means to have great alarm or an exceeding great concern. So he literally is saying to them, I am very alarmed about you. You don't say that about somebody you don't care about. If you don't care about them, you don't care.
Right.
But when you care, you can become very concerned. And then he used the word labor. This word translated labor means fatigue that is caused by hard work. It means to become wearisome. So he is admitting that he wearied himself through extremely hard work among them. And then he used the word vain, which means empty labor, or labor that failed, labor that produced no result. So I have great alarm or great concern that I exhausted myself, that I labored to the point of fatigue, and it's possible that I produced no good results while I was there. Verse 12, Brethren, I beseech you, be as I am, for I am as you are. You have not injured me at all. So here we see the word injury. Even though he's saying you haven't injured me at all, evidently there is the supposition that they thought they had injured him, or he thought they had injured him, or they thought he had injured them. Though he says he was not injured. The word injured here literally means to be unjust. So Paul is either saying, I have not dealt with you in an unjust way, or he's saying, you have not dealt with me in an unjust way. You have not done anything unjustly to me. Verse 13. You know how through infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you at the first. The word infirmity there means to be without strength or to be very feeble. So let that sink in. Paul said, when I showed up the first time to preach the gospel to you and who were in Galatia, I was very feeble in the flesh. What does he mean by that? What do you think that means?
Sick.
He was sick. May not like to admit that. What made him sick? Go read Acts 13 and Acts 14. In Acts 13, we find him going to the Galatian city of Antioch in Pisidia, where it says that he was persecuted and expelled, run out of town. In Acts 14, he goes to the Galatian city of Iconium, where there it says great violence incited against him, and there was a plan and an attempt to stone him, and he had to slip out of town to keep from being killed. In Acts 14:19, he's in the Galatian city of Lystra, where he was stoned to death. They stoned him to the point they knew he was dead, grabbed him, drug him out of the city, threw him on a garbage heap. How many rocks does it take to kill a man?
Just one. Just the one.
Just the one. How many do you think they hit him with? All of them they had. In Acts 14:20, he gets up off that garbage heap where he'd just been stoned and goes into the Galatian city of Derbe and preaches there. So when he says to the Galatians, he preached there at first in very feeble condition in his flesh. Well, we know especially when he got to Derbe that's true, because he had just been stoned to death and thrown on a garbage pile. He is exhausted and he has been beaten. He has been stoned with rocks to the point of killing him. It says in verse 14 of Galatians, "And my temptation was in my flesh, ye despised not nor rejected, but received me as an angel of YAHWEH, even as the Messiah Yeshua." Or even as the Messiah Yeshua. So, understand when he talks about being feeble in the flesh, he's talking about the weakened physical condition that he was in because of the persecution he was receiving. And then in verse 14, this word translated temptation means to experience evil. The evil he experienced in Derbe was evident, in Lystra. The evil he experienced in Lystra was evident on his body. Just because he got up off that garbage heap doesn't mean all the signs of his stoning disappeared.
Right.
The evidence of the evil he suffered was there. Imagine a man that has just had so many stones thrown at him that it kills him. Imagine that man getting up that day and walking into your congregation to preach to you. And just because he's been healed doesn't mean all the signs of what happened disappeared.
Right.
What does his face look like? What does his arms look like? What does his body look like? And Paul brags on the Galatians and says, you didn't despise me or reject me. And he's saying it would have been real easy for them to do that just looking at him. Right. Judging him by the way he looked, it would have been easy to have rejected him. The use of those words suggests to me that Paul did encounter some who would despise him and reject him based solely on the way he looked. But at least he's admitting the Galatians didn't do that. Understand, he looked the way he looked because of the danger he found himself in as a servant of YAHWEH. The beatings, the stonings he suffered, and the scars and deformities they left behind is what he's referring to. And in Galatians 6, he refers to them again. In Galatians 6:17, he says this, "From henceforth, let no man trouble me, for I bear in my body the marks of the Master Yeshua." Don't tell me I don't serve Yeshua. I got the marks to prove that I serve Yeshua. These scars that he had caused some to reject him and despise him. By that, we mean some folks prefer that their preachers be handsome, educated, and dressed in Armani suits. And Paul wasn't such a preacher. Verse 15. "Where is then the blessedness you spake of? For I bear you record that if it had been possible, you would have plucked out your own eyes and have given them to me." So here we have a missing blessedness. He said, where is it? It used to be here, but now it's gone. Where'd it go? And then he talks about a missing desire to help. It used to be there, but now it's gone. Where'd it go? Every now and then, you'll hear teachers speculate that Paul had some oriental eye disease, which was his thorn in the flesh. That speculation is absolute absurdity. Number one, Paul told us what his thorn in the flesh was. It was a messenger of Satan. Right. Number two, read Acts 13 and 14 and you'll figure out why the Galatians would have plucked out their eyes for Paul. His face had been stoned. Yeah. Okay. So Paul said, there was a blessedness that you spoke of when I was there. I can't find that anymore. Where did it go? And he said, at that point, you would have given me your very eyes, but now you don't want to give me the time of day. What's going on? Verse 16. "Am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth?" So he throws the word enemy out here. An enemy is someone to whom you show hostility, someone to whom you're hateful toward. So Paul senses that he has become their enemy, and his only crime is telling them the truth. Verse 17, they zealously affect you, but not well. Yea, they would exclude you that you might affect them. A zealousness is a coveting, but here it's used in a bad way. It's not always bad, but here it's a bad way. That is, Paul says the Galatians had other ministers who were coveting a relationship with them, and Paul said their coveting was bad. That is, they'd be willing to see the Galatians excluded as long as it benefited them, the teacher. They want to, Paul's saying, they want to cut you off, exclude you, either from the kingdom or from Paul. Either way, it's bad. They want to cut you off from me so that they can professionally and financially benefit from a relationship with you. No. Yes. Verse 18, it's good to be zealously affected, always in a good thing, and not only when I'm present with you. So Paul talks here about absence. Paul acknowledges that he can't be there with them all the time. And it would be awesome to have teachers and leaders, ministers, who would genuinely love and help the Galatians when he cannot be there, who would have a zealousness for them. But not everybody has good motives. And so that's what he's acknowledging. My little children, of whom I travail in birth again until the Messiah be formed in you. We'll stop right there and just focus on the word travail for a minute. Paul likens his love and ministry to the Galatians to that of a woman in the very middle of the painful contractions of childbirth. A man sees a woman giving birth, it causes him, or should cause him, to feel amazement. He should be astounded of what his wife just did. And I would think most of us would think, I sure am glad that I don't have to do that. Paul saw that very experience and thought, I go through that exact same pain on a regular basis. I am trying to see the Messiah formed in, and the word there is morph. I'm trying to see the Messiah morphed into the lives of the people I minister to, and he likened that pain that he goes through to that of a woman giving birth. He's not given to hyperbole. He's talking about an actual pain that he endures. Verse 20. I desire to be present with you now and to change my voice, for I stand in doubt of you. So here he acknowledges that he might need to change the tone of his voice. It's not what you said, it's how you said it, right? But he acknowledges that in order for him to do that, he'd need to be there face to face. Paul knew what we also sometimes learn in a very painful way, and that is, it's better to speak to somebody about important things in person when possible, rather than through a letter or through an email or through a text. Because the tone in those can be quite different than it would be if we were talking in person. And then he said, I stand in doubt of you. That word doubt means to be perplexed. Paul said to them, you perplex me. I'm trying to figure out what's going on and why you're doing the things you're doing and the things you're not doing. I'm trying to figure out why you're not doing those, and I'm at a loss. I don't understand. I'm perplexed. So, just real quickly to go back over the words Paul used to talk about the present condition of his relationship with the Galatians. He used the words fear, labor, vain or empty labor, injury or unjustness. He doesn't feel like happened there, but others must. Infirmity or feebleness of the flesh, temptation or his experience with evil, being despised, rejected, a missing blessedness, missing help, eyes that needed to be replaced, enemies, bad zealousness or bad coveting, being excluded, his absence, travailing in birth pangs, changing the tone of his voice, and being perplexed with them. That's quite a list of some pretty negative adjectives when he talks about his relationship with the Galatians and where that relationship has fallen. Paul's saying that those things should not be so. And since this is written from his point of view, not the point of the view of the Galatians, it's written from his point of view, I'm going to approach his words from his point of view. I'm going to deal with what he said from the point of view of the one who ministers. Because I think his words are very valuable at offering insight to those who would want to see what it takes to be a teacher, a minister, a pastor. What does it take? I think if we look at his words, we can understand what it takes. Allow me to point out 5, 6, 7 things, I don't remember. Allow me to point out a few things that Paul reveals to us about ministering. Number 1, there is a lot of labor involved. I've told you before that in all my examination of Scripture, I've never found one man that Yahweh used that was a sissy or that was effeminate. His servants were manly men. The generation on earth today would have accused them of being or of having toxic masculinity. But that's because they've been conditioned to see masculinity itself as being toxic. Right. Yahweh does not find masculinity toxic. He finds it necessary in his servants. What did he tell Joshua? You remember?
Be strong and courageous.
Be strong and courageous. Go look those words up. The word strong means to be a conqueror and a restrainer. One who is obstinate. One who can seize and constrain. Yahweh told Joshua, I'm going to need you to be obstinate. I'm going to need you to conquer and restrain. The word courageous means one who is mentally and physically fortified. Those are the characteristics you find in every biblical example of men who served Yahweh. And he changes not. Right. He still looks for those qualities. The churches of today may prefer a soft-spoken, well-dressed, articulate preacher who always smiles and has encouraging words. That doesn't mean that that man is called or sent by Yahweh. Right. Yahweh not only expects them to be manly, but as we see here, he will not tolerate them being lazy. There's a lot of labor involved. I had a man call me 16 years ago or so and asked me what I thought he'd have to do to get into, quote unquote, full-time ministry. I told him to come by my office the next morning and we'd talk. The next morning he called to cancel and tell me he decided he didn't need to come. I said, yeah, you need to come. Come on, let's talk. So he came. I listened to him as he expressed his desire to be in the full-time ministry. And he asked me what he needed to do. And I said, well, the first thing you need to do is go get a job. You sit around all day typing out emails, putting scripture in them, sending them out, and thinking that you're in ministry, and you send your wife off every day to go to work. So the first thing you need to do is go get a job if you want to be in full-time ministry. Yahweh found David shepherding sheep. Right. When he calls a man into the ministry, he always goes and finds a man doing a job. Right. Go get a job. That's the reason I didn't want to come. I knew that's what you were going to say, he said. That's what he said. So in other words, he knew he needed to get a job. Right. But he was too lazy to get a job. A lot of time men desire to be in full-time ministry thinking that that means they don't have to have a real job. That's true. Let me speak from experience. I am in full-time ministry and I also have a secular job. And so did Paul. He labored with his own hands many times to provide for his own needs. So sometimes you have to work another job and understand that ministry itself is hard labor. If you're going to get a sermon book and read it and memorize sermons and practice the delivery of them, now that's not hard. A lot of people do that. But if you're going to preach the Word by studying the Word, that takes work. And if you're going to preach the Word you're told to deliver when you know that there's a lot of people who will not like the Word you're about to deliver, you better be willing to work a job to provide for you and your family.
That's true.
So point one is, Paul makes it clear there's a lot of labor involved. Wearisome labor. Point number two. We're not going to belabor these. We're going to move through them. Point number two. As a minister, there is never a desire to injure anyone. Pulpit should never be a whipping post. Paul told Timothy to preach the Word. He said the Word is profitable for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. So sometimes as a minister, you may not want to reprove, correct, and instruct. And sometimes people don't want to be reproved, corrected, or instructed. But I learned years ago from the Ruach HaKodesh that it's not my job to inspire people when they show up. It's my duty to sit before Yahweh, open His Word, and become inspired by what He says to me, and then to deliver those words to those to whom I speak. And if those words reprove, correct, or instruct, then they reprove, correct, and instruct. But no word is ever delivered to injure. There are some people who find Yahweh's words offensive and they get injured by them. And rather than change, they leave. Rather than seeking, or rather than understanding that the minister is not the one who's seeking the change, he's just the one delivering the message. The one seeking the change is Yahweh. But sometimes people get offended and injured, and from that find a reason to leave. They'll never admit that's what it was, but they find a reason to leave. Never, ever have I injured anyone from the pulpit on purpose. And I think that's what Paul's saying to the Galatians. Never have I taken a personal grievance to the pulpit and attacked anyone while teaching. Instead, every week I ask, are you ready for the Word? And I seek to do my best to deliver that to you. So number one, a lot of labor is involved. Number two, there can never be a desire to injure anyone. Number three, if you're going to be a minister, understand you will experience evil. Paul said, my temptation, my experience of evil, you did not despise. That word, translated temptation, again means it's to experience evil. Paul experienced it through physical attacks, of beatings, arrests, and stonings. Today in most places you're not going to be beaten, stoned, or arrested. That doesn't keep you from being attacked. Right. Being told that 98% of your sermons. Right? Right. Most of the attacks you receive today are verbal. But understand, people can be brutal, mean, vicious, and hateful. They will question your abilities. One lady came on social media, and I think it was YouTube, and told me I sounded like Boomhauer off of King of the Hill. They'll question your abilities. They'll question your motives. They'll question your doctrines. They'll question your education. If you think you'd like to get into ministry so everybody will love you, you might want to rethink that. Right. I see Jamie chuckling back there. Yeshua said it this way. Why don't you keep your finger in Galatians 4, but look in Matthew 10. Look right here in verse 24. Yeshua said this to His disciples. The disciple is not above his master, nor the servant above his Lord. It is enough for the disciple that he be as his master or his instructor, and the servant as his Lord or as his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more shall they call them of his household? Yeshua said to the disciples, if they came after me, surely you understand it's only going to intensify when they come after you.
Right.
And we know that the Sermon on the Mount was not really the Sermon on the Mount taught to great multitudes. You know, that's the way it's pictured in Sunday school quarterlies. He set up on a mount and people, thousands gathered around, and he taught them, but that's not what happened. The Sermon on the Mount that we call was actually what I like to call Yeshua's ministerial training program. He brought the 12 up and sat them down and began to teach them how to do what he was doing. And it's interesting to see one of the very first things he said to them in Matthew 5. These words are right at the beginning of this training program. And he said to them in verse 11, blessed are you when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. So that'll make you think before the next time you say, well, I really just want to be blessed. Bless me, Yahweh. Because Yeshua said, blessed are you when this happens.
Right.
You are a blessed person when they revile you. Revile means to taunt you and try to destroy your voice or your fame. Blessed are you when they persecute you. That means pursue you so as to torment you and cause you as much suffering as they can. Blessed are you when they say all manner of evil against you falsely. That is, they say hurtful, harmful, destructive things against you that are not true. You're blessed when that happens. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad. Well, such is the life of those who serve Yeshua.
Right.
They will experience evil. All right, number 4. Ministers have to come to understand that people are devoted to you and your calling one day, and then they can be gone the next.
Right. Yes.
Brace yourself for when they forsake you. Here, Paul, here is heart. Where is the blessedness you spake of? You see that? When I was there, you'd have taken your eyes out and given them to me. What happened? Y'all used to love me. And see the phrase you spoke of? Where's the blessedness you spoke of? So Paul's not imagining their love and devotion. They expressed it to him. They told him how much they loved him. They told him how much they admired what he was doing and how they always wanted to be there to help him. They told him. And now Paul says, where is it?
Yeah.
What happened? One of the best examples I can share with you without sharing too much happened 14, 15 years ago. Maybe 16, I don't know, somewhere around there. A young man came into my office and told me that Yahweh was calling him into the ministry. And he said Yahweh had told him that he was to come into my office and submit himself to me and to serve me. Now, I've never asked anybody, anyone to serve me. Not him or anybody else. But this is what he said. Yahweh told me to submit myself to you and to serve you. He said, I'm here to help you. I'm committing myself and submitting myself to you this day. You can count on me. Well, okay. Awesome. Hug his neck. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later. I get a long letter from him explaining to me why he and his wife are leaving. 2 weeks before, Yahweh told me to submit myself to you. I'm here for you. I'll do anything you need me to do. 2 weeks later, I don't like how things are going around here. I'm out of here. Bye. If you're going to serve in the kingdom, you're going to have to understand that not everyone who says they're committed are going to be committed.
It's true.
I actually had back when we used to, we'd have the traditional altar calls and all that stuff, and people joining and that thing. We were down at South Parkway in that building. YAHWEH is so awesome. He is so awesome. But we had a house full that day, and we gave the altar call, and this couple came up, and they were just full of zeal and energy and excitement, and they took my hand and they said, we want to join here, we want to serve here, this is the place we've been looking for. And the more excited they got, the more excited I got. And then I heard the voice of the Ruach HaKodesh. Never had it happen before, never had it happen since. But while I was shaking their hand, I heard the Ruach HaKodesh say to me, do not trust yourself to them. I stepped back. They're still carrying on. I thought that was weird. That was weird. Over the next year and a half or so, I came to understand. I listened to it, and I always proceeded with caution. And when it was all over, I was thankful for that one word that the Holy Spirit gave me. You can't trust yourself to everybody. And not everybody who says they're committed and fired up and wants to be a part really have pure motives. Now I commend you. Conrad and Lisa have endured and been faithful in every definition of the word since almost the beginning. I think they missed by 2 or 3 weeks when we started. It wasn't many weeks. So they've been here since the beginning. And though we may not get to hug their necks or see their faces weekly right now, their faithfulness to this work still abounds. And their love for this work still abounds. Bill has endured and been faithful since the beginning. At the first, he was driving all the way from Minor, Alabama.
Yes, sir.
Moved a little bit closer, but still not real close. Amazing how most people don't mind driving, however they got to drive to go see a ball game or eat a dinner, but if they got to drive more than 15 minutes to get to an assembly, they don't want to go. But he's endured and been faithful in every sense of the word since the beginning. Matthew and India have endured from those early years. Even back when they were coming separately and didn't even know each other. Right? I told Matthew more than once that he had opportunity to leave and didn't leave, and I respected him for it. Luke has endured. Been here since he was just a little boy himself. Bob Brown has endured. You may not see him this morning or his family, but his faithfulness to this work still abounds. My children have endured, and their families that have grown have endured. And that's not always easy to do. Every one of these people haven't endured because it's been just a wonderful, beautiful, unbumpy ride. They've had to endure stuff, but they've endured anyway. And those of you who haven't been with us quite as long as these, all I'm saying is that over the past 18 years, these that I just mentioned could have left too, but they didn't. And I'm glad y'all are here, and have no doubt you'll have opportunity to leave. I hope you don't. The interesting thing that I've seen through decades about people leaving is they never want to just leave. They want to take others with them when they leave.
Right. Yeah.
So the ones who have stayed were enticed to also leave with the others when they left. So they were able to withstand that as well. People leave for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes they get seduced by other ministries. It's what Paul referred to when he said that zealously affected them, but not for good. Other ministries will try to seduce them away, put them on their roles. Sometimes people get deceived by other ministries and other voices. They get turned against the word you're preaching by somebody else. Sometimes they get injured. Not intentionally, as I said before, but people get injured. Well, we all do.
Yes, sir.
Rub some dirt on it and go on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Don't take your ball and go home. I'll just take my ball and go home. Suck it up. It's going to be okay. Paul mentioned the tone of voice. Sometimes people take offense at the tone and ignore the deep-seated love that's been demonstrated for years. The tone upsets them, and so they leave. Sometimes they don't like the direction you're going in. In other words, we had a pretty good-sized congregation in South Huntsville
Right.
until we went to saying no Easter,
Right.
no Christmas,
Right.
no Halloween. We lost a bunch over that. And then came the Sabbath, and we lost some over that. And then the feast days, and you lose some over that. What I'm saying is that being forsaken is part and parcel to the job description of being a minister. John said it this way in his epistle. John said, "They that went out from us weren't of us."
Yeah.
And that's what you got to understand. They went out from us because they were not of us. It just happens. The fifth thing you have to understand when it comes to being a minister is money's involved. Money. Do you know that? Do you know that ministers need money too? The power company will not allow us to just take care of their prayer requests every month and write off our power bill. They want cash, check, or credit card. Ministers need food, cars, tires, phones, clothes. However, no true minister does it for the money. Hirelings do it for the money.
Right.
You can spot them. They refuse to preach truth because it shrinks audiences. And I use the word audience on purpose because they are performers, not true ministers.
Yeah.
But because there are hirelings out there who make merchandise out of people and who make merchandise out of the gospel, they cause the true servants of Yahweh to suffer. Now, how do they cause true servants to suffer? Well, number one, they deceive people. And the deceived don't know they're deceived, and that's why we call them deceived. And being deceived, the deceived give their resources to the deceiver and reject those who are teaching truth.
Right.
Another way they cause true servants to suffer is true servants become very cautious when it comes to money because they don't want to be accused of being a hireling. And so they rarely will mention money for fear of being accused of doing it for money.
Right.
But the fact remains that Yahweh expects His servants to be taken care of financially. Study the tithe. Yahweh said this in Leviticus 27:30. And all the tithe of the land, whether of the seed of the land or of the fruit of the tree, is Yahweh's. It is holy unto Yahweh. So the tithe is not ours, it's His. I get amused. Amused may not be the correct word, but it's the one I'll use right now. I get amused by the fact that most major denominations don't believe that we have to keep the law, but they still teach tithing.
Right.
And their people tithe. But what makes it really amusing is Hebrew Roots teaches we should keep the law, but they don't teach tithing.
Right.
It's bewildering, actually. Most Hebrew Roots teachers and followers say, well, I don't farm, I don't have an orchard, and I don't have a vineyard. Leviticus 27 said, the land, the trees, the vineyard, I don't have any of that, so it doesn't apply to me. Well, that's absurd lunacy.
Right.
Isaiah said, if you're willing and obedient, you'll eat the good of the land. What comes out of the land? Everything. Everything comes out of the land. Everything. The clothes you wear, the house you live in, the car you drive. We've said it before, we're going to say it again. None of it came off a different planet.
Right.
None of it came from Mars. None of it came from outer space. Everything that we have and enjoy, that we produce and that we use, came out of the land. Right? So to say, well, I'm not a farmer, so that verse in Leviticus doesn't apply to me, is absolute lunacy. I don't care what you do. I don't care what kind of work you do. It's the land that's producing whatever increase you have.
Yes, sir.
And Yahweh said, the tithe of it is mine. What does He do with it?
Whatever He wants.
He does whatever He wants because it's His.
Right.
But if you read it, He gives it to His ministers,
Yes.
serving in His kingdom. You don't.
Right.
It's not yours to give.
Right.
It's His. That's the reason you can't dictate what He preaches, because you don't hire Him, because you don't have the money to hire Him.
Right.
Yahweh takes care of Him.
Yes, sir.
So Yahweh dictates what He preaches. That's the way it's supposed to be. Paul dealt with this subject again in chapter 6. We may be already tired of dealing with it, but we're going to jump over to chapter 6. I don't usually do that. When you're going verse by verse, I like to stay verse by verse, but it seems necessary to go ahead and deal with Galatians 6 this morning, where Paul continued this subject. Galatians 6:6, let him that is taught in the word communicate unto him that teaches in all good things. Where communicate means to share with. Let him that is taught in the word share with him that teaches the word. Be not deceived, Yahweh is not mocked, for whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. Talking about sowing seed into the teacher. Still talking about the same subject. For he that sows to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that sows to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. He's still talking about what he said in verse 6. You understand? Mm-hmm. What he's saying in verse 5 or 7 and verse 8 is, in verse 6 he said, share with him that teaches. Verse 7 he said, be not deceived, God's not mocked. You can't say, well, I can't afford to. What a man sows, that shall he also reap. Verse 8 he says, he that sows to the flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. You say, well, I can't do that, but in verse 8, you sure do find a way to do whatever else you want to do. And there's some things that have earthly, what's the word I'm looking for? Fruit. Some things have spiritual fruit. Verse 9, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Still talking about the same subject. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are the household of faith. Still talking about the same subject. So he's talking about communicating or sharing, all right? Bill mentioned last week that, and you guys were so gracious and generous, and y'all overwhelmed us with your love. Y'all continue to do that year after year after year. But Bill mentioned last week as he shared your gift to us that I could have pastored large Baptist churches or Word of Faith churches. I don't know how large, but I would agree probably larger. But my refusal to do that happened on the night of my ordination. The night they ordained me, I'm sitting in a room with, I am 19, maybe I'm 20. And I'm sitting in a room with preachers that were pastors that were 50, 60 years old. My pastor was there. He was in his 20s. But most of them in that room were 50 and 60 years old. One of them was the president of the Southern Baptist Association there in the county. And he said this to me: before we ordain you, I need you to promise me that if you see something wrong in our doctrine, if you begin to believe differently, that you will promise me you will not preach that.
Wow.
I listened to what he said, I processed it, and I said, no sir, I cannot make you that promise.
All right.
And it made him angry.
Yeah.
And he re-asked the question, restated the request. And I said, sir, your request makes no sense to me. How can I believe something and not preach it?
Mm-hmm.
You're asking me to believe something to be true and to set it aside. And he was okay with that. And actually called for the dismissal of the presbytery and for me not to be ordained. And my pastor spoke up and said, no, I think we're misunderstanding Stephen. And he made it all okay and he got them to calm down, but I made every pastor in there mad. It would have been real easy to say, yes sir, I'm Baptist from my radiator to my taillights. I'll only preach Baptist doctrine. But I never saw myself being anything but a Baptist preacher. Never.
Right.
But I could not give that man the response he wanted based on the way he worded it.
Right.
Worded it. Right? Makes me wonder how many people they ordained that did say, I promise.
Yeah.
And every time they saw the truth, they'd have to say, well, I promised I wouldn't preach that.
Yeah.
When I graduated from Samford University, I had professors pull me aside and told me that I needed to resign the church I was pastoring and go to seminary. That I was not meant to pastor small country churches. At the time we were running 150, 180 people. But they told me I was not meant to pastor small country churches. I was meant for something bigger. They needed me or wanted me desperately to go to seminary. I explained to them that YAHWEH had sent me. Of course, I didn't know him by his name at that time, but I explained to them that he had sent me there to that congregation and I would not leave until he said so. I would not leave just for the hopes of a larger congregation. That did not go over well. At that congregation, they tried to get me to leave. It wasn't but about a year later that the deacons of that congregation decided that they could tell me what I could and could not preach. And demanded that I quit preaching certain things. I explained to them that I wasn't for hire. They could fire me, but they couldn't hire me. And they said, yeah, matter of fact, we can. You're fired. And threw me and my wife and my small children out with no place to go. Fast forward years ahead, I had a cushy job in Fort Worth as associate pastor to one of the biggest names in the Word of Faith movement. But I could not pursue the truth that I knew to be in the Scriptures and stay there. We came here and began to build a congregation of substantial size. There was a much larger Word of Faith congregation up the road just a little way. Well established, beautiful building, great facilities, probably 2-3 times larger than we were, probably 3 times larger than we were. One of the deacons came to see me and said, "We want to talk to you about coming and being our pastor. Blend your congregation with ours and be our pastor." I said, "If you would like to talk about you blending with us, I'd love to sit down and talk to you. But if you want me to blend with you, it's not going to happen." It offended him and he left. As I said, our congregation began to grow, and then there were the subjects of Easter, Christmas, Halloween. All of these things, the Sabbath and the feast days, began to whittle it down to where it is now. I said all that to say this: I'm not in it for the acceptance of my peers or for money. I'm not lazy. I don't mind working. I have worked and will work. But when I do work, it's going to be at a job where I can still serve Yahweh as I'm supposed to. In 2002 or 3, I don't know the exact date, but we had just launched our congregation, our assembly. I realized that I was needing a secular job. Home Depot had, back then you had newspapers and stuff. They had run an ad. They were looking actually for a area manager. I had served in that position with 84 Lumber years before, so I applied for the job. Starting salary was $85,000, plus a vehicle, plus benefits, plus bonuses, plus opportunity for advancement. They offered me the job, but I'd have to travel, and sometimes that meant even the weekends. I turned them down. In 2017, after working for Mighty Auto Parts for about 6 or 7 years and nearly starving to death, I went back and interviewed with 84 Lumber because they had built a place up here in North Alabama. They offered me a job that would have paid me 4 times what I'm making right now. I told them I'd sleep on it, and as I tried to sleep on it, I contemplated and remembered the stress, the hours, the coming home and staying up late into the night, going over blueprints, generating material lists. I called them the next day and declined. Said all that to say I could make more money, and I know that. And Yahweh knows that. And that is why He says in Leviticus and in other places, He'll take care of me. And that's why He tells those who are taught to tithe and to share. That's how His system works. And this I can testify. After being here for 18 years, I wouldn't do anything different. He has taken great care of me and of us.
Great.
If you don't like that preachers receive money, you have a heart issue that you need to deal with. If you don't like it, go complain to Yahweh and see how far you get. All right, lastly, sometimes involved in ministry is travailing. Paul says that as a true minister, your great desire is to see Yeshua formed in those to whom you minister. He likened it to the extreme pain of childbirth. And I understand what he's saying. Week after week you labor, and it's not to build a building or to build a name or to build fame. It's to see Yeshua morph inside the people you're ministering to. All of the labor becomes worth it the moment you see people start talking like Yeshua, walking like Yeshua, acting like Yeshua. You see Him morph inside of them and you think, there it is. That's what all of this was about. You see Yeshua in your flock manifesting in someone being a dad. You see Him manifested in someone as a mom. You see Him manifesting in someone as your friend. You see Him manifesting as an employer or an employee. When you see Him morphing inside of them, then you think all this labor's been worth it. The difficulty that you have to deal with through the years is all the miscarriages that you suffer. People who get so close to seeing Yeshua morph inside of them, and then they fall away. But you learn to focus on those in whom He is formed. And it encourages you to go another day, study another hour, teach another lesson, answer another email, respond to another social media post, make another video, get up and go to your secular job one more day. Because as a minister, you realize that the true assembly of Yahweh is not near as big as it looks.
Yeah.
So when you see what looks like just a few people, that is few compared to the larger congregations and the work that it looks like they're doing. When you see what looks like just a few, you realize that this is great reason to rejoice, because inside the larger congregations, actually there's really only a few who get it. My job's not to build a large congregation. If it were, the tactics would be different. My job is to see Yeshua morph inside of those to whom I preach. The last thing Paul said is this, and I do close with it. Paul said, I stand in doubt of you. Told you that word means perplexed. And so as a minister, you also learn this lesson. You learn that there are some people who are going to perplex you. No matter how hard you try, you're never going to understand them. You cast seed. Sometimes it falls on stony ground. Sometimes it falls among briars. Sometimes it can't get deep enough. But you just keep on casting seed. You don't let the stony ground perplex you. You don't let those who are covered in briars perplex you. Sometimes you bestow labor on people in vain. That doesn't mean you did it wrong. Like any good minister, Paul's trying to keep from losing those that he has given so much of his time and energy to. He is trying desperately to keep from losing them. But in the end, that decision does not lie with him. It lies with them. And all he could do was plead with them. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. As His name is put upon you, so shall He bless you.